Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and I would like to thank the EAE and the ARCC for inviting me. I'm very glad to be here. The title of my talk is Urban Transformation, How Do We Know? The subtitle, How Do We Know, is both a question to guide collective inquiry, but also a statement of intent, and that's why you see there's no question mark there. So what is urban transformation? Urban transformation is drastic and fundamental change in the structure of a place. Urban transformation is also a measure of doing good, of making progress. The American philosophical movement known as pragmatism defines progress in terms of moral progress, which consists of increased human equality and increased imaginative power. Transformative design, with all its creative possibilities, can be one powerful enactment of increased imaginative power. How do we know when urban transformation has occurred? One common understanding of urban transformation is observed through major shifts in patterns of the material city, as seen here in the examples of San Francisco and Las Vegas. These include historic changes, spatial growth, and three-dimensional change, such as the evolution of public spaces like Union Square in New York City, in the bottom of the slide. In this perspective, significant change over scales of time and space are crucial. A second common understanding of urban transformation is in terms of rapid and large-scale population growth, as currently seen in African cities. Rapid urbanization, whether due to industrialization in the 19th century or migration within developing countries in the 20th century, represents economic and social trends, but also reflects the human textures of cities. A third type is measured through quality of life indicators, such as health, pollution, education, and infrastructure. These indicators are meant to represent relative rankings of cities around the world, with improvements in indicators supposedly reflecting significant improvements in the quality of life for their citizens. Such indicators often serve as policy goals for local and state governments. A fourth type is an even deeper qualitative judgment of cities that can be achieved through what the urbanist Kevin Lynch calls performance dimensions, such as vitality, sense, fit, access, control, efficiency, and justice. Thus, urban transformation has been traditionally discussed in terms of spatial change. However, an overemphasis on changes primarily in the material city can lead to a relatively superficial understanding of what urban transformation actually is. Therefore, I propose two shifts in our understanding of urban transformation. One is that form is only a means or an accessory to deeper structural change. And the second is that transformation must have a direct impact on people's lives. Ultimately, urban transformation must be experienced as a process, an outcome, or a possibility, even if sometimes it can only be recognized in hindsight. To develop these ideas even further, I propose three fundamental shifts in the conceptualization and practice of urbanism. One is beyond material objects, city as flux. Second is beyond intentions, the consequences of design. And the third is beyond practice, urbanism as a creative political act. I draw from the American philosophical movement, which I mentioned earlier, pragmatism, To articulate these conceptual shifts, and then to illustrate them in this talk with experiments in urban transformation that I have conducted in my practice over the years. So while the city may be designed, built, and experienced as a three-dimensional material object, the crucial fourth dimension of time requires that the city be more appropriately conceptualized as flux, that is, as constant change. Furthermore, our perceptions and understandings of the city are also changing. Urbanists should have a conceptual grasp of flux in order to shift design thinking, to learn to be flexible, and to regard projects as thoughtful and adaptive experiments. Such an understanding of the city also leads to rethinking practice, in which we pay close attention to the things that have deeper and more long-term impacts, often establishing the more deterministic frameworks within which shorter-term adaptation occurs. In 2009, an experimental urban design studio at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Boston tested this notion of design as a verb, a becoming and unfolding process. Such a process is similar to the art of comedy improvisation, such that it fosters playful interactions among different ideas, strategies, interventions, scales, and materials, and injects continuous energy into the evolution of a project. The comedy improvisation skills were learned not only through exercises and practice in the studio, but also through an urban design process applied to a site and project. The site for the studio was located near downtown Boston, between the more historic Chinatown area and the emerging South End area. In terms of the creative process of design, the comedy improvisation exercises proved very useful in mitigating some of the inherent biases of the students and opened their minds to new approaches. Among the important lessons learned by the group was to minimize fear-based self-editing, to nurture a supportive environment, to learn to act in thoughtful yet unscripted ways, and to discover opportunities and patterns by building on the work of others. These lessons were enhanced by the risky performative nature of comedy improvisation and applied by students to the design process. Many academic studios obsess about producing radical urban forms in which there's often innovation for the sake of innovation, what I call the tyranny of novelty. The approach adopted in this studio was both more thoughtful and actually more radical. To engage in an experimental and open-ended design process and to continuously reflect critically on its outcomes. The design outcomes followed in this process were nuanced but nonetheless significant. One example of this was adopting a fine-grained approach to the facilitation of a myriad of human activities, such as moving, eating, or playing, rather than ascribing conventional land uses such as residential, retail, or industrial. As urbanists learn to navigate the ambiguity of the city building process with its multiple stakeholders, conflicting goals, and political decision-making, they also need sets of skills that are not normally taught in architecture, landscape architecture, urban design, or planning programs. Techniques of comedy improvisation support creative collaboration as increasingly interdependent sets of tasks require abilities to work effectively with others and communicate ideas with commitment, while being open to the ideas of others that may not normally fit within one's field of perception. The second conceptual shift I'm going to talk about is about the consequences of design. In the design fields, much attention is given to the ideas and intentions of a project or strategy. But what matters ultimately are the actual impacts on the city and on the lives of the people who inhabit it. What are the actual consequences of the design process on both the material and the immaterial city? This question pushes us to consider and engage with the fundamental generators of the material city, such as the profit imperative, power structures that privilege certain interests over others, and deeper societal values such as commodification or even democracy. Thus, the meaning of a fundamental concept such as design or urbanism depends not only what is intended by it, but by the actual outcomes and impacts it engenders. The India Habitat Center in New Delhi is an intellectual, social, cultural, and policy campus in the heart of a bustling city. It is a medium density complex with office and institutional workplaces for 37 housing and infrastructure related organizations, conference facilities, libraries, parking, restaurants, exhibition spaces, and performing spaces. The key to the project was redesigning institutions as a way of redesigning the city. In this case, by grouping like-minded urban housing and infrastructure organizations for collaboration and exchange. Spearheaded by the Government of India's Housing and Urban Development Corporation, the group of member organizations of the center includes think tanks such as the Central Building Research Institute, private companies such as Infrastructure Leasing and Financial Services Limited, and non-profit organizations such as the Energy and Resources Institute. At the time, this was a highly unprecedented undertaking in India. The central theme of the design of the campus is sharing. Shared open spaces, shared parking, shared food services, and shared conference facilities, all of which minimizes the campus's ecological footprint while promoting social and intellectual interaction. The key type of public space is the garden courtyard, each one of which is landscaped with trees, plants, and flowers, and uses a specially designed louvered canopy that shelters from the hot Indian sun while allowing natural light and breezes. The courtyards are used every day to go from building to building, but also for outdoor events, including informal ones when school children come to visit. These large garden courtyards create temperate microclimates and spaces for social interaction. The primary consequence for the city is the creation of a vibrant new urban center that has public, private, and non-profit institutions sharing space, a venue for serious intellectual and policy discussions, art galleries and performance spaces, and even a place where children visit and animate the spaces. All of this is accomplished in a highly sensitive and meticulous design that is actually quite sustainable without feeling the need to shout from the rooftops that it is sustainable, because it builds upon modest yet millennia-old traditions of climatically and ecologically sensitive design in India. The third conceptual shift I'm going to talk about is beyond practice. Pragmatists think of moral progress as increased imaginative power that results in increased sensitivity and responsiveness to the needs of larger and larger varieties of people and other living beings. Serious moral choices, such as designing for profit versus designing for public benefit, cannot be reduced to a simple calculation. Rather, these choices are profound discussions of what is worthwhile to do. An important area of increased imaginative power is for urbanists to engage in a dialectical relationship with the ongoing project of democracy. Democratic procedures can result in an improved design outcome. But more importantly, the very process of design can strengthen democracy. For example, urbanists can conceive of projects in ways that contribute to the constant building and rebuilding of participative and pluralist communities. Urbanism can be practiced as a creative political act that relies on such moral choices. The Uptown Whittier specific plan was designed to attract investment, to generate economic development, and to create a higher quality of design and mixed-use development in a historic urban core in Southern California. Our firm, Moole and Polyzoides, was selected through a competitive process because we were known for two critical design strategies: working with the existing fabric in highly sensitive ways, and being able to pull together large numbers of multiple stakeholders in a highly transparent manner. The first step was to, in fact, design an intensive process of public engagement, including an exhaustive set of interviews, focus groups, public meetings, group site visits, and a week-long public design charrette where critical decisions were made on site. The design process worked directly through a public process of larger public meetings and smaller work sessions with the mayor, the city council, planning commission, design review board, and planning staff. The single biggest obstacle to this design project was the city manager. The city manager held great power because he literally controlled the purse strings and insisted on getting the budget numbers right, according to his criteria. After much resistance and debate, we finally designed the budget for him, and the project moved forward and was implemented. You can't see this table, but it is part of the budget that I designed. So is municipal budgeting part of the design urbanism process? In many cases, absolutely. Even though designers and urbanists are not conventionally trained to design municipal budgets, these budgets are often the linchpins of urban projects. We were able to accomplish this because of the multidisciplinary nature of our team, including a public economist who not only understood budgeting, but also had an extensive understanding of design due to his previous collaborations with us. Because of this unique approach, the plan was implemented even before it was fully completed and attracted much attention and investment, and was finally recognized with a prestigious award. The design approach included short-term projects that were implemented immediately, such as a cleaning and maintenance strategy for sidewalks and design guidelines for new buildings, as well as long-term strategies such as creating a framework for future growth with a mix of new housing types and parking strategies that generate revenue to be reinvested in the area. The key insight from the Uptown Whittier specific plan focuses on interrogating and changing the relationship between power and design. Even though the project was about economic development and urbanism, the approach was fundamentally political: to open up decision-making and make it transparent, to involve key community and business groups, and ultimately to create a political constituency for urbanism that would continue to move forward with the project even after the formal involvement of the designers was over. This approach is messy, exhausting, and very much worthwhile. What are design strategies for urban transformation? In my work, I make an argument for urbanism to be a design strategy itself for the transformation of cities. Of course, sweeping urban transformations often fail and more often have a dark side that lead to further exploitation of the underprivileged and reinforce the prevailing power structures. A critical reading of the histories of urbanism reveals many such pitfalls to identify and lessons to learn. So what may be some other design strategies for urban transformations? There are three strategies I have already outlined in this short talk. The first is to generate collective inquiry by asking powerful questions. The second is to view profound philosophies such as pragmatism as sources of inspiration. For example, according to the pragmatist philosopher John Dewey, democracy is the most desirable form of government because it provides the kind of freedom necessary for both individual growth and citizen cooperation. The key is that political institutions of any democracy should be constantly subject to criticism and improvement. Processes of urbanism can be designed to strengthen the ideals of democracy. The third strategy I've touched on is to learn from case studies of transformation, however imperfect they may be. So the conceptual shifts and case studies I have presented so far are examples of design strategies for urban transformation. I believe, however, we can do even better by aspiring to even greater heights. So I would like to conclude this talk with the fourth and perhaps the most powerful design strategy. This type of strategy draws its aspirations from exemplary transformations in history. The Indian independence movement remains one of the largest mobilizations of mass energy when 390 million people at the time gained independence from one of the largest and most oppressive colonial powers, the British Empire. This movement exercised a form of power dramatically different from that of governments or armies or violent revolutions. This was because its leadership, especially Mahatma Gandhi, conceived of how to convert the power of non-violence into effective political action. In 1955, Martin Luther King Jr. helped lead the first great African-American non-violent demonstration of contemporary times in the United States, the Montgomery Bus Boycott. Soon thereafter, the Supreme Court of the United States declared unconstitutional the laws requiring segregation of buses. Between 1957 and 1968, King traveled over 6 million miles and spoke 2,500 times, appearing wherever there was injustice, protest, and action. And meanwhile, he wrote books as well as numerous articles. He led a massive protest in Birmingham. He planned the drives in Alabama for the registration of African Americans as voters, and he directed a peaceful march on Washington, D.C. of 250,000 people. In 1968, while standing on the balcony of his motel room in Memphis, Tennessee, where he was to lead a protest march seeking economic and social justice for the striking garbage workers of that city, he was assassinated. So, what might these historic examples of breathtaking transformation suggest to us about design strategies for transforming cities? First, Gandhi and King's strategies worked on multiple levels. They, of course, worked at a material level because the acts of non-violence occurred spatially in cities and public places all over the country. However, the strategies were also political, personal, and even spiritual. Second, they were actively political in that they worked with and often through existing political and institutional frameworks while simultaneously challenging them. Third, and this may be the most overlooked lesson for architects and urbanists, they involved a great deal of struggle and a great deal of sacrifice over long periods of time. Thank you.